welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our medical and laboratory business here at Intertek. And today I'm so thrilled to be joined by my colleague, Bruce McGill. Bruce, hi, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Clarissa, and it's always a privilege and an honor to come on to Clarissa's podcast. So looking forward to this.
Yeah, so excited to have you. So Bruce, for everyone, maybe you can give a brief introduction. Bruce is our VP of certification globally. So maybe you can give a brief intro to yourself, Bruce, kind of where you sit in the organization and what your responsibilities are.
Sure. As Clarissa mentioned, I'm the VP for global certification within the electrical business line. I look after all certification activities within our business operations at a global level. And predominantly, it equates to around 16 certification bodies delivering all types of certification services around the world.
Yeah, so you have a lot on your plate. And today we're going to talk about, this is a bit of a tongue twister for me, but the MoIAT requirement, right, for medical devices. So maybe, I know a lot of people probably aren't familiar with this one specifically. So maybe you can give just kind of a generic, what does this mean? Who does this apply to? Who should be prepared for this?
Okay, yeah, because it's, as you say, a bit of a mouthful, but actually it stands for the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology at MoIAT. And this is a government department within the Emirati government. And it recently changed its name, actually. It used to be called ESMA, which was the old Emirates Standards Metrology Authorization, but they did a bit of a restructure within their regulatory controls within the Emiratis, and they come up with a new name for this government department that covers both for regulatory controls and for standards metrology going forward.
And does this apply to everybody? I mean, who has to be aware of this new requirement?
Okay, so but let's be specific, I think, now. So MoIAT, the ministry, have introduced a new regulation. It came out issued in about August last year. Mm-hmm. And when it was introduced, it had a 30-day transition period once published on the official Gazette. So you could say from around the end of October 2023 it became effective. And it's a specific decision called the resolution, or the cabinet, to be exactly clear, is called Cabinet Resolution number 90 of 2023. And it's very specific. It covers a range of medical and instrumentation used in scientific medical world. And it has a scope of some 14 categories of equipment. And what you have to understand, this is a little bit different, perhaps, what you perhaps see in Europe under the medical devices regulation. This is very specific. It breaks down into, if you like, 3 parts in the regulation. It covers essentially what the conformity requirements are, the scope of the equipment, and the surveillance on how it's going to be managed and controlled going forward. Perhaps if I talk a little about, first of all, what are the actual scope itself. And when we say medical devices, we have to be very clear here. This regulation it's not the same as how we classify, say, the MDR. We have both medical devices and IVD classifications. This is purely looking at the metrology requirements of instrumentation used in scientific and for medical use. So it covers essentially the calibration requirements and references of what can be used or what is prohibited to be used in regards in the health and social care within the Emirati healthcare system. So it covers essentially, if you like, 2 essential parts from a conformity perspective, both from the calibration perspective and in regards to, let's say, for safety and performance use. So let's just go talk briefly about the actual scope itself. And I'm actually going to quote directly from the regulation on this, because it's have to be very clear what type of products or devices we're talking about here. So we start off with digital clinical thermometers, electrical medical clinical thermometers, non-invasive mechanical automated sphygmometers. Hope I've said that correctly. And then non-invasive automated sphygmometers and glass automatic pipettes, calculated pipettes, graduated pipettes, graduated flasks, piconometers, which is for specific density measurement, burettes, not the type of burette you go to the Mexican with, but the actual burette, the measurement burette, graduated measuring cylinders, flasks, medical syringes, measurement instrument verified by reference material. That's an interesting one. I'll come back to that. And then ionizing radiation dosimeters for measurement of radiation, and measurement instrumentation that shall have a calibrated certificate. So essentially what the regulation refers to is first of all the equipment within that scope of range has a certificate of conformity, in addition to a calibration certificate from a normal 70/25 accredited source. And then there's the prohibitions in regards to market surveillance. And what is interesting is they talk about a verification marking. And because we're talking more to do with metrology and accuracy of the instrumentation, the verification marking we're referring to is under, if you're familiar with the term OIML, that's the International Authority for Metrology Limits. They produce their own standards and certification program, and for the OIML mark. And part of this verification process, the Emirati government are looking for notified bodies, of which Intertek is a notified body for other regulations and cabinet decisions on the Emirati market. They're looking for essentially third party to support the verification and the certification process. So there's an opportunity for Intertek, for example, to become a notified body where they will do the conformity assessment and issue the certificate of conformity on validation and checking that the equipment meets essentially the OIML requirements. So in addition to being a notified body under the Emirati program, Intertek would, or any body would need to also be a member to be able to issue the OIML mark with, say, the International Authority for Metrology Limits. So essentially,
let me pause you right here and ask a quick question, because I think this process is similar but different, right, to some of the other processes that medical device manufacturers have to follow. So this regulation guidance came out in the end of 2023 in November, and then had a 30-day transition period, right? So now everyone is required to be complying with this, right? Correct. Going through the process of having the calibration certificate and also having the certification, and then they're applying to a notified body to then get authorization to put some sort of mark on it. Is that the process?
Well, the marking requirements to go on the, if you like, the packaging and actually on the equipment is the OIML mark. Mm-hmm. And the certificate, then there's a separate certificate of conformity that's then issued by the notified body on behalf of MoIAT. Mm-hmm. With regards to then registration, there's no, unlike say the MDR for in the EMA in Europe, where you have this pre-registration system, that mm-hmm. is not. Yes, that happens for normal medical devices, but that's through a separate authority. It's the Ministry of Health, MOH, mm-hmm. and it's a separate government department, and that is a direct, registration to this other government department where you register your medical device, it gets approved, and the certificate issued by MOH themselves. So it's for normal medical devices, that's the normal route. Mm-hmm. But this is more to do with the accuracy of the metrology that's been applied, because within the regulation it breaks down into 14 annexes per the 14 equipment categories, and it defines the referencing to an OIML regulation, which they do issue the limitations on. So the tolerance and accuracy of for example, on syringes and flasks and measurement baguettes, they have different levels of classification for graduation, either to 0.01 or 0.1, depending on the classification. So it's all to do with accuracy of the instrumentation. And so that's defined within the regulation. And in this particular case, when the notified body issues the certificate, it's directly onto MoIAT's website. They manage the database. So therefore, when it's registered there, it's then registered, if you like, in the country. And the normal process that applies for an importer. You have to be a registered importer in the country to actually place any of these medical or clinical equipment onto the market. So that's a normal process there. And what's interestingly is the conformity methods for meeting, for example, on the safety side. So if I said, for example, on the thermometers, they're using ISO standards, particularly 80601 series. Particularly in this case, it's the 601-2-56, which in this case is for electrical thermometers. And then the EMC requirements, they use an EN standard. They're using EN, for example, a 60601-2-1 standard, which is standard EN practice for medical devices. So you are meeting the safety and performance requirements, but then in addition, validation of the accuracy. And what's interesting is when I refer to as prohibited equipment, or let's say equipment that's subject to metrology, any equipment that does not meet the metrology requirements cannot be used in any healthcare facility within the EU and in the Emirates. And with regards to penalties, etc., well, that would normally apply in the case for non-use. Now, what's interesting on the surveillance requirements, which are conducted by MoIAT themselves, they have defined if they do find, let's say, equipment that's used in a scientific or medical facility that does not have, say, an OML mark and has not been issued a conformity certificate, there is an option for the manufacturer, or should I say the importer of the equipment, to then get the samples tested. And then basically they take 3 sets of samples from the batch imported, do the testing at the importer's costs. And if they are within the calibration metrology limits and safety requirements, then they can be kept on the market. Failing that, it would be a recall from the market.
Yeah, so interesting. So the post-market surveillance, so the audits are being conducted by MoIAT directly, you're saying, right? And not by the notified bodies. And then they're obviously being expected to update on a regular basis. I mean, when we're talking about accuracy, are you proving over time, right? Are you proving calibration over time, right? If they're concerned about the accuracy of the measurements.
Yeah, so the accuracy limits are laid down for each of the equipments within the regulations, and it makes a direct reference to the OML limit reference, which is the international limits that's very specific for these equipments. But what's also interesting is that the validity period, it's done annually and it's done on a type approval. So yes, there's market surveillance to validate the accuracy of the equipment being used by MoIAT themselves, but the notified body will be doing an update validation on an annual basis. So it's basically a type approval based on an annual period of 12-month validity. And
interesting.
So when you say most of this is the equipment for calibration is done annually as well, and so essentially the importer or whoever's placed the equipment on the market will be reaching out to the notified body on an annual basis. Here's my calibration report, my certificate issued by a 1725 accredited laboratory. The notified body does the validation and checks. They issue an updated certificate of conformity to complete the cycle. So that's how it works in that sense.
And then do we have any visibility currently into how many notified bodies there are that exist for this already? I mean, obviously this is, fairly new coming out, but are there notified bodies that exist currently to support a manufacturer if they're looking to fulfill this requirement?
Currently, there's one we believe that are going through the process to get the notification, and that's from our friends in SGS. And so we in Intertek, we are looking at Well, first of all, the first process, you need to be an accredited body with OIML first. So that's the first step process. Once we have that in place, then it'd be applying to MoIAT for the notification process to become a notified body for this specific cabinet resolution. And so we're kind of looking at that now as a business opportunity, as we would normally do anyway. And what's interesting is obviously the scope and, shall we say, the number, or let's say the size of the healthcare market in the Emirates, which extensively is all private health. And again, on the scope of the type of equipment, these are vast, I would say, more so vast consumables more than anything else, particularly when you talk about pipettes and syringes, because a lot of this type of, let's say, medical or clinical equipment is used once and thrown away. So the volume, so the volume is quite, even on the variation types, on say some of the electrical measuring equipment, such as the digital thermometers or the speganometers, which are both manual pressure and for automated pressure reading. Again, vast range of many types of these type of products exist on the market. So we see the actual imports of this scope of equipment under this resolution, I would say, is low to medium, but significant enough to look at as an opportunity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned too, and I just want to go back to this, right? The kind of consequences or what happens if someone is not in compliance. Again, knowing that this is a really new requirement, and you said that currently, they would take samples, 3 sets of samples from somebody, right? If they are not in compliance at this point or have failed to be in compliance. Is that currently the process as it stands for the near future? I mean, sometimes we see, right, people being forced to pull products from market, or fines or fees or things like that. But is all we're seeing right now just this idea that you would have to just go forward and have them tested if you're found out of compliance?
Actually, they are referring, there's an ISO standard, and I'm just going to, if I can remember it, I'm going to quote it here. And this is an ISO standard, I believe, quite if I'm right or wrong, and this refers to, just to my notes here, yes, ISO standard 2859-1. It's a method of sampling from the market, and within the regulation there's a clear set of tables and the number of samples that they would select from each of those category of equipment, and in reference to when they do this surveillance. So that obviously would be done at another third-party laboratory to validate and verify if the manufacturer has placed the equipment without the necessary calibration certificates or with the necessary approval, certificate of conformity and approval from MoIAT themselves. So there is that as a backstop, but obviously it would be much better in the case of our importers of this type of equipment to get all the necessary qualification of certification in place prior to placing on the market. But there is that backstop. I think the backstop was put in place really as a stopgap for the medical equipment that's currently on the market. Yeah. So, but I would suspect once you get through, let's say 2-3 years of conformity assessment, the amount of equipment that's been used in these medical or scientific type facilities would be then become more so less and less as we move forward. But at the moment, we see what's interesting also, there is further consequences they might refer to. I mentioned about obviously product being withdrawn from the market. What the other factor is that if the equipment does not meet the calibration requirements, there's very, very heavy reference to that. When I say the calibration or the limit requirements for metrology, they are prohibited from use. So I would expect to see a lot of equipment that does not meet the requirement, particularly in the healthcare system, being returned back to point of origin. So this
is applying to any new products that are being shipped into the country, but they're also going through the process of anything that's already existing out on the market currently. Yeah. So that obviously will be a high volume, right? When we think about just in terms of, the amount of product that would already be out there. So just to kind of wrap it up for everybody, I think, we understand they can view the regulation and see if their product applies in those 14 different categories, right? So you have to review that and understand if it's applicable to your product or not. You have to make sure that you're complying with the standard requirements, the calibration requirements, selecting the notified body to then be registered with MoIAT to make sure that you're having your ongoing surveillance and ongoing compliance, labeling the product. Am I missing anything in the process there that they have to make sure that they're doing?
No, the only thing I will add is, yes, the actual regulation itself is available on the MoIAT website under under the section on the web page, legal documentation and regulation. The only unfortunate is all the regulations are in Arabic, as you would expect.
Yeah.
However, it does not cost too much to get them translated and notified under a notification to do an official translation. And incidentally, the regulation is purchasable in English language directly from MoIAT themselves.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah. So it's great to know for our manufacturers out there. Well, Bruce, this was super interesting. I think, you touched on it, but we obviously see so much growth and opportunity coming out of the Emirates and UAE, right? I mean, there's just a lot of development there from a medical device perspective. We see a lot of movement in the region. And so I think we'll continue to see more regulations, more information, more development of medical device technologies. So it's really good to stay on top of it and stay aware. So of course, if people have questions, they can reach out direct. We can happy to have side conversations. Again, I know this might not be familiar to everybody who's out there. So if you want to have a conversation with Bruce about this, he is a great expert and a good resource. So feel free to reach out directly. So Bruce, thanks again for joining.
And you're most welcome, Clarissa. And again, it was a pleasure being on your famous podcast. And I look forward to perhaps the next one. Take care.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much.
Cheers now. Thanks. Bye-bye.